Hello, everyone. Today, I'd like to talk about AI adoption because I think that there's a storm coming and there are a lot of really large forces behind this storm. And that as business leaders, we need to, first of all, understand what's happening and not to dismiss the challenges that are ahead of us, and also come up with some ideas of what sort of work we're going to have to do in order to get through this storm. So why is there a storm coming? Well, over the last few years, we've invested enormous amounts of money in artificial intelligence. There has been, let's call it $1 trillion of money that's gone into that. And of course, that's driven many multiples of that, many trillions of dollars in market capitalization in big, mostly American technology companies. That has propped up the American economy. Probably the only source of GDP growth for the United States this year has been investment in artificial intelligence. And so obviously there's a lot of economic pressure from that perspective to get some revenue. There isn't a lot of revenue coming out of it, maybe 50 billion in annual recurring revenue. Obviously that's not nearly enough for the kind of investments that's going in. So there's pressure from big tech, and there's smart people with lots of money who are going to try to find ways to help people, make people use these tools. And then for companies, for us who are leading companies, obviously we need to keep up. We need to have productivity growth. We need to keep up with the state of the industry. And so we are under pressure to adopt and to get value out of the artificial intelligence. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot of things can go wrong. And the tools that we bring to the task are not fit for purpose. We think in terms of change management. We need to reassure people. We need to retrain them. We need to reskill them. But we're looking at very small bore weapons to deal with a pretty large issue. How big is the issue? Well, if you look at what the doomers are saying, they'll use phrases like AI will destroy humanity, which on the face of it is either absurd or sort of an apocalyptic claim. But if you look a little deeper, even using those words indicates something that is actually true. Most things, here's an important clue about how reality works. Most things that are important and true are true fractally. So they're true at the highest, biggest picture level, and then they're true also at the smallest level. And of course, there's changes, there are phase changes as you move through different levels of size. Sometimes that changes how something will show up in the world. But if AI will destroy humanity is a concern, then it is not literally that killer robots will self-organize and kill all of the human bodies. That might happen, and that is a concern. But the idea that it will destroy our humanity in some way is the microcosmic concern, which is really quite reasonable. I mean, it happens all the time, right? If I am doing a task and then let's say I'm a graphic designer and a whole bunch of my work transfers to a machine that can now do this for me, then this changes my story. This changes my story. And this happens with every technology. Every technology always destroys humanity in some way, some small way. So if you just think of, you're living in the Stone Age and you pick up a stone instead of trying to tan a hide with your hands, then obviously you gain something. It's easier to tan the hide with the sharp stone than it is to tan it with your hands, but you lose something by way of immediate interaction with the world around you. This is the archetype of what technology does. We gain power, but we lose immediacy of interaction. And then some part of our humanity atrophies and develops differently in order to adapt to this technology. The technologies that have the biggest impact on us are the ones that change the way we process information. And when I look at what's happening with artificial intelligence now, not even the doomsday scenarios or what might happen or artificial AGI or whatever you want to call it, but what we already have right now, I think it is probably on the scale of the invention of writing or the invention of the printing press. And these things were not benign. Obviously, they brought a lot of what we would call improvements, progress, but they also destroyed a lot of things. The printing press brought the Middle Ages to an end. The invention of writing and literacy to go along with that writing has obviously fundamentally reshaped how humans interact. So every technology changes something about how we interact with the world. It destroys some part of our humanity and it changes us. It atrophies something in order to get greater power. So Of course, we can all say, well, this is great. This is how progress happens. We get tools, we get more power. We don't have to do the things we don't want to do. And that's all true. And we need to be able to trace the thread of that progress. We also need to be able to trace the thread of what technology fundamentally changes or destroys. And I also think we need to pay particular attention to any technology that fundamentally disrupts the way that we process information. Artificial intelligence has the potential to disrupt our ability to make sense, make meaning. And those skills are already under an enormous amount of strain in our society. And this is not some apocalyptic conspiracy theory. This is just simple research of what happens when people use artificial intelligence. Their ability to manipulate ideas and to create sense, make sense of the world with words, goes down when they use generative AI to do their writing for them. So again, that might be a good thing, or we should be able to trace the thread of how that's positive. And we also must be able to understand and to trace the thread of how that disrupts who we are. So change of information processing is particularly disruptive. It is a large scale or a high impact version or example of how technology always disrupts things. And I think we should pay attention to how our sense-making apparatus will atrophy with the adoption of AI, just as our muscles atrophy when we have created physical machines. So what's the solution to this? Well, if we go back to the problem, which is stated as AI will destroy humanity, what we mean by that is a general, if we take that into a general statement about technology, we could come to the conclusion that technology only works for us insofar as we incorporate it into our human stories and into the human story. Now, that's a hard job. And it's not guaranteed that we will be successful. Like I said, there's always a destructive element. There's always something that falls apart. And sometimes it's a very large thing. Obviously, the Industrial Revolution was amazing. It's changed our lives. You would not be hearing this podcast. You probably wouldn't even exist if it weren't for the Industrial Revolution. Nonetheless, the Industrial Revolution fundamentally reshaped how families work, how towns work, our relationship to the ecologies, the physical ecologies that we're a part of. Let's not underestimate the difficulty of the job of incorporating technology into the human story and adapting the human story so that it can be constructive and elevated during a time of great disruption. So that's sort of the thing that I want to highlight for us as we're dealing with this problem of AI adoption. Let's not just see this as reassuring people, retraining people, telling them, don't worry, your story is going to be fine. No, our stories and our story is not going to be fine. This is a big deal. And I think by understanding the scope, understanding the storyline that we're in, we can design better interventions. And this comes back to kind of the principle of the Coherent Business Podcast, the Coherent Business Project, and what we are here for. And that is to turn leaders into better meaning makers. I think that need is accelerating specifically because of artificial intelligence, because as artificial intelligence atrophies or displaces our sense-making apparatus, especially at a time of disruption when we need to have the muscles strong to make sense and to incorporate new things into the human story, that the ability of leaders to make sense, to create meaning is going to accelerate. And that's something that this podcast obviously is setting out to do. That process of incorporating into the human story, those can be small things like retraining, mapping out a formation process for people so that they can see how their productivity can be increased through the new tools that are coming online, rather than simply that it will be disruptive. And it also includes some very large jobs for society as a whole. We're probably going to need different ways of redistributing wealth. And I hate to say that as a business person, as someone who believes in free markets, but the drive of inequality that this is bringing already is not to be trifled with, and that's a large job. Another one is retooling education. In order for people to be able to exist in an age of AI, we'll have to be a lot more dedicated about the formation of humans. You can think of this as everything from parenting to a liberal arts education, to civic engagement. Like all of these things that make us human will have to be accelerated, ramped up massively if we're going to remain human and incorporate this massive technological shift into our story. And again, I'm not talking about what might happen. I'm really just talking about what we have now, or maybe the very near future. There's a lot more disruption that can come from this. But again, the topic of this talk is AI adoption. So what we're trying to focus on is the story of AI adoption as an example of the story of technological adoption. And then by tracing how those stories play themselves out, we give ourselves a sense of the size of the task and the importance of meaning making as a part of that task. So large jobs or small in this integrative process, we need to be prepared for some pretty substantial clashes, both because of the economic pressure, the speed of the change, the fact that it has to do with our sense-making apparatus. And then my hope, of course, is that we'll get very good at sense-making, at meaning-making within our organizations, and we'll be able to backfill what technology is disrupting or reshaping for us. So there'll be more to come. If you have thoughts on this, please let me know. Obviously, this is a work in progress, and I'll be working on some additional materials to make this a little more practical, a little bit more coherent or articulate. But if you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear from you. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for listening to the Coherent Business Podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something from you, and I'd ask you now just to take the time to comment, to rate the show, and to think of someone who might be wrestling with similar questions that you can share some of these conversations with. That's what we're here for, is to try together to advance the state of the art when it comes to running a coherent business. Until next time, keep thinking, keep listening, and keep weaving things together.